or the puppy in the rain. Marco Vitelli had built his empire on fear and calculated decisions. At 42, the name alone commanded respect or terror depending on which side of his world you stood. But that rainy Tuesday evening, standing in the marble foyer of his Chicago mansion, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: helplessness. His 8-year-old son, Luca, sat crumpled on the grand staircase, sobbing so hard his small body shook. Between gasps, the boy choked out words that made Marco's jaw tighten. She took Biscuit, threw him out, said he was dirty. Marco's fiancée, Vivian, stood by the ornate mirror, checking her reflection with the same cold precision she applied to everything. Designer dress, perfect hair, calculated smile. She'd been the logical choice, connected family, elegant, ambitious, the kind of woman who understood his world. "The dog was destroying my Persian rug," Vivian said flatly, not bothering to turn around. "And honestly, Marco, you're too soft on the boy. He needs discipline, not some mangy—" "Where?" Marco's voice was deadly quiet. "2 blocks east, the alley by Morrison Street," she waved dismissively. "It's just a dog." Marco looked at his son, his only soft spot in a hardened life, the one pure thing left after his wife had died 3 years ago. Luca had begged for that golden retriever puppy for months. Marco had finally relented 6 weeks ago, and the boy's face had lit up like Christmas morning. "Stay with him," Marco ordered his head of security, already grabbing his coat. But before he reached the door, it opened. Elena Vasquez, the new housemaid hired just 2 months ago, stood dripping wet in the doorway. In her arms, wrapped in her own soaking jacket, was a trembling ball of golden fur. "Mr. Vitelli," she said quietly, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching, something few people dared. "I believe this belongs to Luca." The foyer went silent except for the sound of rain and Luca's sudden gasp. "Biscuit!" The boy flew down the stairs, and Eleanor carefully lowered herself to his level, transferring the shivering puppy into his arms. Biscuit immediately began licking Luca's tear-stained face, tail wagging frantically. Marco stared at this woman he barely knew. Elena was quiet, efficient, kept to herself. Mid-30s, he guessed. She never asked questions, never gossiped with the other staff. He'd barely spoken 10 words to her. She was drenched to the bone, her simple clothes clinging to her frame, dark hair plastered to her face. She must have run through the storm. "How did you—" he began. "I was finishing the upstairs windows when I saw Miss Laurent's driver leave. I noticed something in his hands." Elena's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "I followed. The puppy was in a cardboard box in the alley. It was falling apart from the rain." Vivian's reflection finally turned, her expression sharp. "You followed my driver?" "That's quite the overreach for a maid." Elena stood, meeting Vivian's gaze steadily. "I followed a man abandoning a child's pet in a storm. I'd do it again." Marco saw his fiancée's face flush with anger, but something else was happening inside him. A shift, like tectonic plates realigning. He watched Eleanor, this woman who had nothing, who owed him and his family nothing beyond her employment contract, standing there dripping rainwater onto his expensive floors because she'd run through a storm to save his son's dog. Then he looked at Vivian, who'd thrown that dog out like trash, without a second thought about Luca's heartbreaking. "Vivian, we need to talk privately." His tone left no room for argument. The conversation in his study lasted less than 5 minutes. Marco had built his reputation on reading people, on knowing when someone showed their true colors. Vivian had just revealed hers, and it was a shade of cold. He couldn't allow near his son. The engagement was off. Her protests about alliances and agreements fell on deaf ears. He'd find another way. He always did. When he returned to the foyer, Luca was sitting on the floor with Biscuit, both wrapped in towels that Elena had fetched. The maid was trying to slip away quietly. "Elena, wait!" She stopped, turning to face him with that same calm composure. "Thank you," Marco said, and he meant it in a way he rarely meant anything. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she replied simply. "He's just a little boy who loves his dog." Over the next weeks, Marco found himself noticing things. How Elena always had a kind word for Luca, how she'd leave his favorite snacks out after school without being asked, how she'd trained Biscuit to sit and stay, using YouTube videos on her phone during her breaks, how she'd gently correct the puppy's behavior without ever raising her voice, how she treated everyone, from his most dangerous associates to the delivery drivers, with the same quiet dignity. One evening, Marco found her in the library, reading to Luca while Biscuit snoozed between them. She was doing different voices for the characters, making his son laugh, a sound that had become precious in this house of heavy silences. She noticed him watching and moved to stand, but he gestured for her to continue. He leaned against a doorframe, listening to a simple story about friendship and bravery, and felt something crack in his chest. After Luca went to bed, Marco found Elena in the kitchen, preparing staff meals for the next day. "Sit down," he said. "Please." She dried her hands, uncertainty crossing her face for the first time. "I want to know," Marco said, "why you did it." "The truth." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "My younger brother, he had a dog when we were kids. My father, he wasn't a good man. One day, angry about something, he took the dog and we never saw him again. My brother was 11. He cried for months." She met Marco's eyes. "I saw that same look starting in Luca's face. I couldn't let it happen. Not when I could stop it. Where's your brother now?" "He died. Gang violence 6 years ago." Her voice remained steady, but Marco heard the grief underneath. He was trying to leave that life. Almost made it. Marco understood then. She knew his world, had lived in its shadows, had lost people to it. Yet she'd still chosen kindness, still chosen to protect an innocent joy in a dark world. "I misjudged what matters," he said finally. "I thought I needed someone who understood power. But Luca needs someone who understands love. Mr. Vitelli, Marco, and I'm not proposing or anything crazy," he added quickly, seeing her alarm. "I just mean stay, not as a maid, as family. You're good for him. You remind both of us that there's more to life than the empire I built." Over the following months, something unexpected grew. Elena became Luca's nanny, then his tutor, then simply a fixture in their lives that neither could imagine losing. Marco found himself looking forward to family dinners where she coaxed stories out of Luca and somehow got even. Marco talking about his own childhood, memories he'd buried under years of armor. She challenged him too. When he was too harsh with his son, she'd quietly suggest another approach. When his business bled too much into family time, she'd clear her throat and give him a pointed look that somehow worked better than any threat. And Luca bloomed. His laughter returned. His nightmares about losing his mother faded. Biscuit grew from a trembling puppy into a loyal, goofy companion. One evening, a year after the rain-soaked rescue, Marco found Elena on the back terrace, watching Luca teach Biscuit to catch a frisbee. "I was wrong about everything," he said, standing beside her. "I thought I knew what my son needed. What I needed. I was building alliances when I should have been building a home." "You're building it now," Elena said softly. "We are," he corrected and took her hand. She didn't pull away. It was another 6 months before Marco properly courted her, before he asked the question he'd once asked the wrong woman. But when Elena said yes, with Luca jumping up and down and Biscuit barking joyfully, Marco knew he'd finally made the right choice. Not because Elena understood his empire, but because she'd reminded him what empires were for, protecting the things that mattered. The wedding was small, just family, real family. And as Marco watched his bride walk down the aisle with Luca proudly at her side and Biscuit wearing a bow tie, he thought about that rainy night, about how one act of kindness, one person choosing compassion over convenience, had saved more than just a puppy. It had saved them all. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't in commanding fear. It's in recognizing love, when it runs through the rain to rescue what's precious, even when no one's watching. And sometimes the best person for a man who's seen the worst of the world is someone who chooses every day to show him the best of humanity. The end. In a world that often rewards coldness and calculation, The warmest hearts are the ones worth protecting, and the ones that end up protecting us.